I think you should pick Yanqing, or perhaps it's gonna be Yanqing. You definitely don't want to miss Yanqing. That is what I would say if I hit my head hard. But I did not, so yeah, don't pick him. Hello internet! And today I'll be analyzing all the standard 5-star characters and helping you decide which characters or even Eidolons to go for using the coming 2.7 standard 5-star selector ticket. I still don't know why they decided to give us this, but not that I would complain, right? And yep, let's just start with the few characters and Eidolons that are simply not recommended. These are the characters that I don't think anyone should go for unless they just truly want to play with them. We have Yanqing, Bailu, and Japan. The problem with all three of these characters are that their role simply isn't strong enough for today's meta. For example, Bailu herself and her Eidolons all does not provide her with the needed debuff cleansing that you desperately need these days. The rest share somewhat of a similar problem, with Yanqing falling behind for damage even with Eidolons and Japar falling behind for the lack of consistency in his shields. Note that I'm not saying they're unusable, it's just that compared to other options, you may want to prioritize the others. But hey, if you just like a character, then you can still go for it. Now that that's out the way, let's get into the other characters first, and then I'll touch on their Eidolons later. I'll be ranking the characters from the least recommended to the most, which will start with Welt Yang. Welt is a half crowd control, half crit DPS, which has both multi-target and single target damage. The problem with him is that at E0, he will suffer from some energy issues where ideally you want to use his ult as fast as you can, as much as you can to clear out the mobs first, so that his skill can all bounce only to a singular boss. That is how he can do a lot of damage actually. This does get solved with his Eidolons later on though, but if you're wondering if he's worth it at E0, I would tell you otherwise. Moving up on the list, we will have Clara. She's the less prominent Yunli in the game currently, especially at E0. Her issue is mainly where she struggles against a singular boss, as her whole kit is multi-target. Especially at E0 as well, you really do need the enemy to hit her as well. I wouldn't suggest investing in her without Eidolons, considering you'd likely have a better time just investing in another versatile DPS or wait for another in the future. Next on the list will be Bronya. This may come as a surprise, but hear me out here. Bronya is only somewhat worth it these days if you somehow don't have her yet, and if you specifically have a boot hill and would love to use him. Otherwise, Bronya falls short in most other team comps, with her main problem being how skill point hungry she is. However, note that with Sunday coming in that can also action advance just as well, if not better than Bronya. She is no longer the unique action advancer that she once was, even in a boot hill team, which is why she isn't the top of this list. Speaking of which, at the top, we actually have Himeko. Rather surprising, no? For a while, she was considered low tier, but all of that changed with Pure Fiction's release. You see, Himeko in Pure Fiction is a godsend as long as you can weakness break your enemies. Especially with the recent announcement about the changes in Pure Fiction, Himeko's constant AoE damage pretty much just got even better. If you're unaware, they announced that in the coming updates, the damage taken by the mobs in Pure Fiction will also be taken by the boss. On top of that, the mobs will never stop spawning until the boss is defeated. This means if you invest now in a Himeko even at E0, she can perhaps outperform even the limited characters we have in the game in the coming Pure Fiction, for the fact that she has a lot of follow-up attacks that's AoE, and all you really gotta do is to break the enemies. And that is why my precious Himeko will be my personal top choice for the selector. I will never let you go this time. And those are my personal recommendations when it comes to E0 selections. Keep in mind though, you shouldn't expect these E0 characters to outperform the modern day banner characters, as their kits are quite dated. Except for Himeko in Pure Fiction actually, that one's still great. Continuing on though, let's talk about all of the Eidolons, which is what I think should be the main consideration for a lot of us, since we definitely lost enough 50-50s, right? I'll be listing down every character's Eidolons starting from the most valuable ones. You should grab it, especially if you're, say, an Eidolon away from E6. For the record, I will be leaving out E3 and E5 as all of them are just skill upgrades that isn't worth too much anyway. And yep, let's just follow my previous list and start with Welt Yang. His most valuable Eidolon is undoubtedly E6. If you have an E5 well, might as well finish it off with E6. This Eidolon states that it deals damage 1 extra time when Welt uses his skill. It does sound pretty mid, but this isn't only just for more damage. However, it also does trigger your talent 1 extra time. This means that also triggers the E2 1 extra time, which generates you more energy. Ultimately, that means if you run him with Tingyun, it is now possible to use an ult every other turn with Welt, clearing out the mobs as fast as you can and setting yourself up to hit a singular boss with your skill quickly. His damage is honestly increased significantly with this. Go ahead and watch some showcases and you'll see. If you don't get to have him at E6, the next best Eidolon to go for would be E2. E2 says Welt regenerates energy when his talent is triggered, which contributes to more ultimates, which is what you want on Welt. The rest of his Eidolons though are simply not worth spending your ticket for in my opinion, so yep, either get him to E2 or E6 with this one. If you're not in a position to do so, think about the other characters. Which we have next on the list, we have Clara's Eidolons. To start with the best, it is obviously her E6. And you start to notice the pattern here. E6s are generally pretty good. Clara's E6 allows Clara to have a 50% chance at countering even if your allies are hit. Not to mention she gets one extra enhanced counter on her ultimate, overall giving her a massive damage boost and energy regeneration as a whole. This changes the game for Clara, making her quite busted even in today's meta. Next on the ranks of the Eidolons will be her E2, which gives her 30% attack after using her ultimate for 2 turns. The way this Eidolon will be worth it is if you're able to make sure this buff never runs out, which shouldn't be too hard considering Clara is built very slow. This makes up for a lack of damage at E0 to the point where she can perform decent even against single target bosses with physical weakness. However though, she ain't no Yun Li, let's just keep that in mind. The rest of her Eidolons are not too important in my opinion. E1 basically lowers the restriction to her counter attacks, but it doesn't give you more damage. On the other hand, E4 only reduces damage suffered, not too needed for Clara. Moving up next, we will be talking about Bronya's Eidolons. The most valuable one is obviously E6, which extends her buff duration, making it possible for even Jingyuan and Lightning Lord to fully enjoy her benefits. Other characters that may also benefit from this would be someone like Jing Liu that has to take 2 turns in a row sometimes. The next Eidolon to consider for would be her E1, which has 50% chance to recover a skill point when you use her skill. This does make her less skill point hungry, and if you're lucky enough, it can save you one whole cycle in MOC where you shouldn't be able to use her skill, but you simply can and your DPS get action advance and clean things up for you. After E1 though, we will have E2, which just means more speed for your DPS. This is overall just good. You never hate more speed, especially in a boot hill team. Not too much to complain about this one. The rest of her Eidolon, which is pretty much just E4, is quite conditional as it only happens against win-weak enemies, so yeah, not too worth it to aim for. And finally, we have our Queen Himeko. Her most valuable Eidolon is actually going to be E2 in my opinion. It allows her to do 15% more damage to enemies with 50% HP or less, which is perfect to clear out mobs. This also means it's perfect for pure fiction, which is exactly what you need Himeko to do, and that is why E2 should be the dream Eidolon for her. Next off would be her E4. It allows her to gain 1 extra point of charge if she inflicts weakness break. This just means more follow-up attacks, which means more AoE for pure fiction as well. Fairly straightforward. This is the only character so far where the E6 isn't quite the most valuable, considering her E6 more so helps her against single target scenarios where the boss is more bulky. Not quite her bread and butter. Her E1 gets her more speed, which isn't too useful when she relies more on allies breaking the enemies than taking her turns. And that will be all for my coverage on who you should go for with a Selector. Do let me know what you think. Before we end though, do remember, choosing for who you like is the best way to go about it, especially when it's just standard banner characters that already have their limited counterparts being released constantly. And that will be all for today. Take care.